Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third in our EPB-APECS webinar series. And today we will be listening to Jennifer Ngo-Anh from ESA, talking about ESA's Human Research Office activities, including their work at the Concordia Research Station in Antarctica. So we're very thank you for Jennifer for agreeing to give this webinar today. Before we start, I'll just say a couple of things. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, if you save them till the end, but you can use, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen where you can type those in, and then at the end we'll put those to Jennifer after the presentation. The webinar is being recorded, so if you want to recap on anything today, you'll be able to access it again via the European Polar Board website, where we'll upload a video of the webinar in the next few days. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Jennifer.
Thank you for the introduction, Joseph, and thank you all for having me here today. As Joseph already mentioned, my name is Jennifer Ngo-Anh. I work for the European Space Agency, where I'm heading the Human Research Office in the Directorate of Human and Robotic Exploration Programs. And I'm very honored to be able to share with you today what we do in our Human Research Program. Why do we do certain projects and activities within our program, and how do our activities contribute to the ultimate goal of enabling human exploration of the solar system? Now, humans have long looked at the stars and asked what is out there. From the earliest civilizations to the present day, it has always been part of our nature to explore the unknown, to go beyond borders. Exploration, investigation, and scientific discoveries have always been essential elements in the history of humanity, and they will continue to be part of our drive. The exploration of space is an engine of innovation and inspiration, and science is a very important part in this endeavor. Now, for the last 50 years, we have continuously occupied space. We have shown that humans can survive and work in space for long durations. But up until now, flights of astronauts have mostly been limited to low Earth orbit, meaning not more than 500 kilometers away from our Mother Earth. The exceptions, of course, were the Apollo missions to the moon. Now, human spaceflight is currently entering the next phase of space exploration, and that is that we would like to go back to the moon. We would ultimately like to go and visit Mars. Such plans are being made by many space agencies around the world, and those plans reflect our continuous drive to extend human presence in space, to colonize space. Now, with the current state of technologies and knowledge, we would not be able to ensure that a human crew gets to a destination in space and then, of course, back safely. It seems very unlikely that we will be able to protect crews sufficiently on a journey to Mars and back over a 30-month period. There are a lot of risks and challenges that crews will be exposed to. So if we want to make the goal of long-duration exploration missions to Moon, Mars, or deep space with human crews a reality, we have to mitigate the risks that are associated with being exposed to the space environment for a very long time. And that is what we do with our Human Research Program. So all the research that we are coordinating in the Human Research Office here at ESA is governed first by our desire to understand how the human body reacts and adapts to the space environment. And then secondly, what can we do to reduce unwanted effects? Or to put it very simply, what does it take to make humans a spacefaring species? So what are the risks? Now, the main risks that have been identified include long duration exposure to cosmic radiation. So we need to find out how to cope, how to deal with the dangers of space radiation. How can we protect future crews from radiation damage to their cells, to their tissues, to their organs? Then there are the psychological effects of being part of a stressful and very complex mission. The social stress, being far away from home. They need to deal with having to live in a very small, cramped spacecraft in a hostile and closed environment. So how do future crew members deal and cope with isolation and confinement? And then, of course, there's the effect of low or zero gravity on the human body. Gravity is a universal and omnipresent force. It has been with us and with all living organisms throughout millions of years of evolution. In daily life, we need gravitational stimulation to maintain good health and fitness. We need gravity to function properly. Now, during long-duration exploration missions into deep space, astronauts will be exposed to microgravity for a long time. They will then have to adapt to live and work in partial gravity, for example, in lunar or Martian gravity. They will then undergo the entire return trip in microgravity again, and then finally they return to our normal 1G environment. In order to function properly throughout the entire mission, the astronauts' bodies have to adapt to each gravitational change. If they do not, they may be unable to accomplish certain tasks and activities during entry, landing, and return. And they would then risk the entire mission due to their reduced performance, due to reduced strength, due to increased risk of falling and increased risk of bone fractures. So that is something we need to avoid. So all those factors have direct impact on the feasibility of such long duration missions, and we need to develop or we need to mature our current countermeasure concept to maintain astronaut health and performance during such long duration exploration missions that we're currently planning. So we need to be able to keep our future crews fit and functional by developing good and efficient countermeasures. And that is what we deal with every day through our projects and activities. So we from ESA's Human Research Office, we support research that will help to bridge the gap in our knowledge needed to enable long duration experiences in space. And we do that by making use of various very unique research platforms through which I would like to walk you today. So with our various research platforms that are part of our human research portfolio, we address all those questions, all those risks systematically. Those research platforms are both in space but also on ground. And each of them addresses and reproduces one or more unique features that are characteristic for the space environment. So each of them provides us with the possibility to address certain risks and challenges that space has on us and on the human body. And I'll depict just a few of those platforms to show you how our various research activities ultimately all fit together. So the most prominent and most innovative research platform that I'm sure you all know is the International Space Station, or ISS. It is the most complex and most innovative research platform that mankind has ever made, and we can be very proud to participate to this greatest international project ever. Many international partners work together for nearly 2 decades to complete one of the most ambitious engineering projects ever conceived. And since assembly was completed in 2011, a very productive research program has been implemented on board the space station that has continuously grown and will continue to deliver unique results until the end of lifetime of ISS. The ISS is a very valuable platform to prepare for long-duration human exploration missions, and human research and technology demonstrations are a significant focus of our activities on board the ISS. Through our activities on board the space station, we have gained a lot of knowledge and experience on how to sustain human health in space. I told you earlier, we still need to address a lot of issues related to human health and performance in order to guarantee mission success with our astronauts. And for this, the ISS is the ideal testbed and offers perfect conditions. So our human research program on board the International Space Station covers all body systems that are affected by the space environment. With our research, we address the issue of aging. Astronauts on board the space station age much faster than people down on Earth, and that allows us to study aging processes in a very structured way. Heart disease is a leading cause of death here on Earth, and we study the cardiovascular system of astronauts on board the space station. So during spaceflight, this very healthy population experiences significant and rapid degradation of cardiovascular performance, and this provides us with the potential to better understand the factors that lead to cardiovascular disease on Earth without other founding factors like comorbidities, age, or what have you. We study the muscle system of our crew members because astronauts work in a weightless environment. Very little muscle contraction is needed to move around. And without regular use and exercise, the muscles of the astronauts weaken and deteriorate, which we really need to counteract again. Again, just imagine that one day we manage to land on Moon or Mars and our crew members arrive on the surface in a state that does not allow them to carry out the tasks that they were trained for. We study the bone system of astronauts. Normally, healthy bone constantly remodels itself, so it breaks down and it renews itself continuously. And this cycle of breakdown and build up helps us to maintain skeletal strength, and it repairs injuries such as fractures, so we can continue to enjoy normal mobility. And as long as these processes are in balance, bone mass and density stay the same. When this natural process is out of balance, the bones and health, of course, suffer. And research on board the space station has shown that in astronauts there is an increased rate of breakdown, but little change in regrowth, and that results in an overall loss in bone mineral density. And this phenomenon on Earth corresponds to osteoporosis. The mechanism is the same, but on the ISS it occurs much faster. So it provides us with an ideal model to study the processes and develop efficient countermeasures. Nutrition is an important issue. It is well known that astronauts are not optimally nourished during their stays in space, but we do not know why. Is it because they have reduced appetite? Is it because taste and smell sensations are altered? We need to know what the normal energy requirements of astronauts are in order to send enough food supplies for their journey. Do astronauts need more or less calories when they are in space? Do we therefore need to send less food along, saving on valuable cargo mass? So you see, we address a lot of interesting questions with our pool of experiments, but of course, preparing for spaceflight is not an easy task. Sending people into space is expensive, it's dangerous. Access to the International Space Station is very constrained. There's huge competition among scientists to use it for their research. And this is why we have alternative research platforms in our portfolio. And this is why we make use of ground-based analog platforms in which we simulate those conditions that are characteristic for the space environment. So we actually do not need to send astronauts to space in order to study how humans adapt to the space environment. We can do space research without having to leave Earth. We can do research on the effects of the space environment on human health and performance without actually having to go into space. And that is actually one of the strong elements of our human research program. We have continuous availability of complementary research platforms next to ISS. So one of those platforms are Bedrest study platforms. Bedrest studies are a very well-established and recognized model to study the effects of long-duration immobilization on the human body. In Bedrest studies, the volunteers spend up to 60 days in bed, tilted towards the head end, usually at -6 degrees below the horizontal. And by putting volunteers in bed for that long period of time, the bodies of the volunteers start to adapt as if they were in space. And we can therefore mimic some aspects of space travel. Bedrest studies are therefore a very valuable tool for us for simulating the effects of weightlessness on the human body. And ESA actually has a very long history of conducting Bedrest studies. But what do we actually gain from reproducing those effects? What is the point of making volunteers suffer? Well, we make use of the effects of Bedrest on the volunteers to test promising countermeasures. We have tested a lot of different countermeasures in the past, ranging from clever exercise devices that can be used in bed to drugs and special nutrition, but none of these have provided us yet with the ultimate solution to counteract the effects of weightlessness on the human body. So the hunt for the perfect countermeasure continues. Now, what do you think? What is the simplest way to counteract the effect of zero gravity on the human body? We take gravity with us. Of course, it's not that simple, but we do have tools to create gravity. We can create artificial gravity. And we can do that by either spinning our future spacecraft that we use to send human crews far away, or, and that is more realistic and feasible, by integrating short-arm human centrifuges into the spacecraft. And this is what we will do. In our Bedrest program, we're focusing on artificial gravity as a countermeasure. We have short-arm human centrifuges that we can use to investigate artificial gravity as a countermeasure. And here's what we plan to do with those centrifuges. So our Bedrest program consists of 3 consecutive slices. In the first slice of activities, we will look into fundamental questions of artificial gravity. So we're going to try to find or identify the optimal protocol that we will recommend to be applied in future long-duration human exploration missions. So we will try to find out what is the ideal frequency of the centrifugation. Is there a specific time of day where we are most susceptible to artificial gravity? Is it a total block of time in artificial gravity, or is it a number of artificial gravity exposures per day that is the most effective? It could be that a combination of both centrifugation and other countermeasures, for example, exercise or nutrition, might be an efficient countermeasure concept to combat the effects of microgravity. And we can test that in Bedrest studies, and we will actually do so in our first slice of activities. And then in the second and third part of our Bedrest program, and that is quite innovative and very exploration oriented, we plan to make use of tilt angles that are different from the standard -6 degrees in order to mimic the effects of lunar and Martian gravity levels. And with that, we will contribute significantly to advanced knowledge that is needed to enable human long-duration exploration missions. And you know what the beauty of this artificial gravity program is? Artificial gravity is not only an integrative approach that covers biological, physiological, and psychological aspects. In addition to that, it's also a multidisciplinary effort that brings together space physiologists, crew surgeons, vehicle designers, and future mission planners to review, to evaluate, and to discuss the issues for incorporating artificial gravity technologies into the future vehicle design. So for any planned long-duration exploration mission with a human crew, the mission vehicle and the habitat designers will meet the actual artificial gravity requirements several years before. But we can only commit to implement artificial gravity after we will have identified a scenario that is validated by the space medicine community. So the findings from our Bedrest program focusing on artificial gravity as a countermeasure will feed into the decision-making process of managers and mission designers for any future mission scenario. Now, since we want to colonize the solar system and since we want to do that still within this century, there is barely enough time between now and then to conduct such validation studies. And that's why we have started this quite ambitious program last year. Now let's move away from artificial gravity and the Bedrest platform and down to Earth, towards the Concordia station, with whom we have been cooperating since 2005. Concordia station is a French-Italian research facility. It's located in the middle of the Antarctic continent, and it is one of only 3 all-year permanently occupied research stations on the Antarctic plateau, besides the Russian Vostok station and the American Amundsen Scott South Pole station. I probably do not need to tell you, this audience probably knows more about Antarctica than me, but let me explain to you why we are involved here, what makes Concordia Station such a fascinating place for human research. Now, Concordia Station shares many stressor characteristics with long-duration deep space missions. The crew members who stay on Concordia Station are extremely isolated and confined. They have to live autonomously, and as such, Concordia serves as a very useful analog for our research. And actually, Concordia Station has been proposed as being one of the highest fidelity analogs on Earth for long-duration deep space missions. The stay on Concordia Station resembles a lot the conditions that astronauts will have to face when they are on long-duration exploration missions. And that is why we have been working together with the operators of Concordia Station since 2005 to use results from human research experiments to extrapolate for missions beyond low Earth orbit into deep space. And we actually plan to expand our program to other Antarctic stations because we are convinced that they can support us tremendously to prepare for human exploration missions. In addition to the human research program that we conduct on Concordia Station, we also use Concordia as a testbed for new technologies. To protect the Antarctic environment, all waste materials must be removed from the continent. And before that, all materials therefore need to be properly treated before we remove it. We developed, together with the operators of Concordia Station, a system to recycle the so-called gray water that is collected from showers, from laundry, and from dishwashing. And that system has been running flawlessly since 2005. We actually achieved more than 95% recycling at hygiene water quality. So this water recycling system that stems from our research on Concordia Station has resulted in technologies and in approaches that are now applied in daily life for conservation activities and also in disaster relief areas. And there's even more potential if we optimize this technology for use in deep space missions. And you know why? Developing and maintaining water production on any spacecraft is important for keeping the crew alive and to keep them clean, to support hygiene and equipment functions. But having enough water on board a spacecraft is actually quite a bit of challenge. In the past, or historically, about half of the ISS station's requirements were met by recycling used water, and the rest was delivered, or the rest of the water that was needed was delivered by visiting cargo vehicles. Now that is not ideal when we think about deep space missions, and that is why there's even greater reason for rethinking a self-generating water solution to which our research is contributing. Did you know that cosmic radiation and its effects on the human body have been identified as one of the main showstoppers for human exploration and colonization of the solar system? Up until now, radiation exposures during our human spaceflight activities were within the geomagnetic shield, so our natural protection against space radiation. Our exposure to space radiation has therefore up until now been sufficiently low, and no special actions were needed to stay within the acceptable radiation dose limits. But it is expected that during interplanetary exploration missions, we will most likely exceed those radiation dose limits. Not only will astronauts on long-duration exploration missions be exposed to increased risk of late cancer, but they also might suffer from early radiation sickness induced by significant solar particle event irradiation, for example, during extravehicular or extrahabitat activities on a planetary surface. On Earth, we're exposed to roughly 3 millisieverts of radiation per year. On the International Space Station, astronauts who typically stay there for an average of 6 months are exposed to roughly 100 millisieverts of radiation. Now, a round-trip mission to Mars, and that is not including time for exploration of the planet, would expose potential astronauts to more than 600 millisieverts of radiation, which is quite scary if you take into account that the current cap for cancer risk is set at 1,000 millisieverts. Unfortunately, up until now, we do not yet have good, practical, and efficient countermeasure or radiation protection strategies at hand. And this is why we make use of a couple of ground-based radiation facilities in Europe, which we use within the so-called EPB program to advance our knowledge in that field. So that is another platform that helps us to prepare for future human exploration missions without having to leave the Earth. Now, the last research platform that I would like to mention today is the very popular Parabolic flight platform. We can use parabolic flights to test the effect of microgravity on fast adapting organ systems. Parabolic flights are therefore a very valuable tool for us to look into microgravity effects on, for example, the neurovestibular system. The beautiful thing about parabolic flights is that they allow us to test microgravity effects with and on humans without having to go through lengthy astronaut training and flights to the International Space Station. During a parabolic flight campaign, which normally consists of 3 individual flights on 3 consecutive days, 30 parabolas are flown on each flight. During each parabola, there is a period of increased gravity, which lasts for about 20 seconds immediately before, and then after the 22-second period of reduced gravity. So we have hypergravity phases that precede and then immediately follow the periods of reduced gravity. ESA makes use of a very special Airbus. It's a A310. And that plane has recently been certified for flying parabolas that provide, in addition to microgravity, partial gravity levels, meaning we can now fly, for example, gravity levels that correspond to lunar and Martian gravity levels. And we will do so in a special campaign that will take place in June of this year. Last but not least at all, we also support activities that do not fit into the box, that do not fit into our traditional platforms, but which are nevertheless worthwhile to pursue because of their innovative and promising potential. When you think about the scariness and all the challenges and risks of space and the space environment, dust, and specifically moon dust, is probably not exactly on your radar screen. But it is much more dangerous than you may realize. Dust is made out of tiny sharp grains. It can be as rough as sandpaper, and therefore it can do quite some damage. Because of the lack of gravity, dust never settles. So just imagine breathing all the dust in, with each breath 1 million tiny particles, and think about the damage it can do to your lungs. In addition, dust is a very fine powder that can stick to everything it touches, and it can find its way into basically everything, including, for example, your spacesuit. The crew of Apollo 17, which you can see here on this slide, with Jack Schmitt and Eugene Cernan, they learned the lesson of how dangerous moon dust can be during the mission back in 1972. After the moonwalk, they were so eager to leave the lunar surface and go back into the lunar lander that they forgot to brush the dust off their spacesuits and boots before re-entering the spacecraft. So the dust clogged up their suits, it spread all over the spacecraft, and they were then stuck with it on their entire journey home. And all the crew members soon complained of nasal congestion, and that is a phenomenon that we now call lunar hay fever. So the topic of lunar dust, or dust in general, is something where a very bright team of scientists is currently trying to develop strategies on how to mitigate the toxic effects of dust in space. Now let's finish with something that may sound crazy at first sight, but it's actually not. Putting astronauts into a long-duration sleep. Hibernation of future long-duration crew members is actually not that crazy. Torpor, which is the short version of hibernation, has been used as therapy since the 1980s, and in practice has been tested and applied in critical care trauma patients and in patients that have to undergo major surgeries since more than a decade. Now, what is torpor? Torpor behavior is actually a widespread phenomenon in nature. Some animals, like black bears, go seasonally into long periods of inactivity with reduced body temperature and metabolism. There are other animals who undergo daily torpor, which is not seasonally dependent, and it can be an important part of energy conservation at any time of year. Torpor in general is characterized by a reduction of metabolic rate and goes along with a controlled decrease of body temperature, a suppression of body functions, and that leads to a suppression of the metabolic rate of up to 75% below the normal metabolic rate. There are protocols in most major medical centers for inducing hypothermia in patients to reduce their metabolism, to basically gain time during surgeries and to keep the patients in a better shape than they would usually be after such intervention. Another example which shows that the concept of torpor in human works are extremely long divers. There are divers who can stay underwater for 12 to 15 minutes with reduced heart rate, and that can also be considered as one human model for torpor. We therefore expect that torpor in humans may be possible and safe. We plan to build on this, and we support this research area further in the future. We would like to identify the neurons and their projections that are activated or blocked during initiation of torpor, and we will also support research that looks into the role of the hypothalamus, which is a very specific part of the brain in those processes. We will, as a first step, test this in animal models. We will start with the hamster for induction of seasonal torpor, and we will then use the mouse model for induction of daily torpor. And ideally, this activity will at some point allow us to induce torpor in astronauts. For sure not today, not tomorrow, but hopefully in time when we embark on a mission to Mars with human crews. Now, this concludes my brief overview on human research activities. I could talk endlessly and in more detail about the various projects and activities that we coordinate, but I do not want to overload you too much. Allow me just one final remark before I conclude this overview. We are very often confronted with the question whether it is justified that we spend valuable taxpayers' money on something that is out of this world. Should we not better use the money to improve life on Earth? Should the money that we spend not better support to solve daily earthly issues and problems? Well, let me tell you one thing. Space research has led to quite some useful applications. The investigation of metallic alloys on board the ISS has contributed to the development of significantly lighter turbine blades for the new Airbus A320neo. With the new material, the turbine blades are not only lighter, but they show also greater strength and less corrosion, allowing the jet engines to be quieter, more fuel efficient, and eco-friendly. We have supported telemedicine research, and telemedicine and remote guidance techniques have been pioneered on board the space station, and they now lead to medical care being more accessible and available in remote regions, using, for example, small ultrasound units that can be controlled from far away. Space exploration is inspiring young men and women to pursue careers in science, engineering, and technology. Those disciplines are key to economic well-being. They nurture advances in energy and healthcare, and they advance our understanding of the environment. So there are a lot of applications that stem from space research, that stem from space exploration, that have led to societal and economic benefits. And I'm convinced that many more will follow, because we have just now begun to make full use of all the platforms and opportunities that are out there. And with that, I would like to thank you for providing me with the opportunity to present our research platforms to you. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Jennifer, for that overview. And as Jennifer said, there's now some time for questions. So if anybody has a question, you can type them into the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you click that, you'll be able to type your question. And it's better there rather than in the chat box, but there are some coming through there as well. I'm going to start off with a question myself first. My question is, how, if at all, have any of the findings from ESA's research that was designed to improve conditions for astronauts, how much has that been applied to improve conditions in Antarctica for overwintering staff at Antarctic stations?
The water recycling system has been successfully used on Concordia station and is now being used in third world countries to help recycle water and provide people there with the opportunity for clean water. So that is one very prominent example and showcase example for how our research has contributed to improve life on Earth. And also the telemedicine research, the telemedicine projects are now regularly being used at Concordia station.
Okay, good. So I'll start reading out some of these questions. We have one from, there's no name on this one, but there's a question about the loss of bone mass, osteoporosis, due to the lack of gravity. And the question is, has there been any investigation into whether the opposite is true, and in conditions of higher gravity, is there a reverse osteoporosis kind of effect?
Very interesting question, and I thank you for that question. We have done, or we have supported experiments that look at hypergravity as a countermeasure. We have done so in a lot of biological models, in animal models. And with our artificial gravity program, we will also look at increased gravity as a countermeasure for humans. So we have up until now not looked at that systematically in humans, but as part of our artificial gravity program, we will do so. We will look at varying gravity levels between 0 and 1, but we will also look at gravity levels above 1. So right now I cannot tell you what those hypergravity research will tell us, but maybe in a few months, in a few years from now, I will have an answer to that.
I hope that answers your question as much as possible. The next question we have is from Helia. Do astronauts take scopolamine or other anti-motion sickness medication during their entire stay at the ISS, or do they adapt to the new environments?
Almost all the astronauts who go to the ISS take anti-motion sickness medication at the very beginning of their stay. They adapt with time to the conditions of the space station, but at the very beginning, everybody complains about headaches, about cardiovascular problems. So it is a common symptom. Right now, medication and also fluid loading, so before the astronauts launch into space, we provide them with a lot of fluid to prepare for the changed environment. So currently those are the countermeasures that astronauts take. But hopefully in the future we will have even better countermeasures, or we will maybe even find scenarios where they will not have to undergo this period of adaptation.
Great. Next, I'll combine these two questions together as they're kind of linked, I think, from Nega and Gabriela. And they want to know what is, if you could briefly explain what your own career path has been to get to end up working at the ESA Human Spaceflight Office, and also are there opportunities for interns, for example, at ESA to get involved?
Yes, we do have student and internship programs. We also have research fellow programs at ESA. I recommend that you regularly check our ESA website. We there have a section that is called vacancy notices, and I invite you to follow that closely. We release such vacancy notes on a quite regular basis.
Okay, and also, if Jennifer, if you, we would like to know, if possible, how you've ended up. What was your career path to end up working in the Human Research Office at ESA? What is your background that has got you to this this stage? That's from Gabriella.
I started with studying medicine, and when I completed my medical studies, I wanted to know more about the human body. I wanted to know more about how we work, what drives us, what is our nature. So I decided to pursue an additional career in neurosciences, and when I completed those studies, I looked for jobs, and because I've always been intrigued about space, I checked actually with NASA whether I could work as an astronaut for them. They even sent me back a letter, which was totally unexpected. They thanked me for my interest and politely told me to go and look somewhere else. So I was a bit disappointed, and it was then that I found out that there is a European Space Agency. So I checked their website. I found that job opportunity, and I have been here ever since. So I joined the agency 12 years ago as a young graduate trainee, and I've progressively taken up more responsibility, and I'm now the head of the Human Research Program.
Great. So I think it sounds like there are lots of different routes for people with different backgrounds to get involved in space research, and even if
Yes,
what you're doing at the moment might not seem related, it could be.
Yes. Follow your dreams.
Yes. So our next question is, until when is the ISS operational, and what is the future involvement of ESA in other space stations, if any? And how? And I'll add to that as well. How is the Human Research Program planning ahead for the end of the ISS, whenever that is?
Right. So the ISS is currently operational until 2024. We are going to discuss whether we can extend the lifetime of ISS until 2023. Technically, 2028. Sorry. Technically, it's feasible, but we need to discuss also with our international partners on how far they want to continue to be involved in the International Space Station. In parallel, we are looking at the Chinese space station. The Chinese have put in place a very ambitious program to launch their own station into orbit. They would like to be operational as of 2022. And we have started to explore possibilities to work together with the Chinese. Also, the United Arab States have started an ambitious program. They want to be on the Martian surface in 111 years from now. And they have just now started to look whether they can go there directly or whether they have to use intermediary space stations in between. So those discussions and those plans are still at a very early stage, but they have contacted us and approached us on whether or not we would be interested in cooperating and sharing our experience with them.
Good. Next question is, again, there's no name on the question, but it's a good question on that. And that is ESA working with private space companies such as SpaceX in its investigations into the effects on human on astronauts in space, on the Human Research Program, for example?
Yes, we have recently started, maybe 2 years ago, to start also to work with private-public partners, the PPP Partnership Program. So within that program, we are actually this and next year going to launch 2 big activities that stem from industries. One is called the IceCube program, industrial commercial little units that will be attached to the space station or integrated to the space station, and that will host standalone small biological experiments. And the other big activity that will start next year is the Bartolomeo project, which is an external platform that is going to be attached to the International Space Station and will allow for external payloads to collect data for biological experiments or astrobiology experiments, for example. So we have started to explore also public-private partnership initiatives.
It's a very exciting area to be working in, and lots of activity from different sectors. Our next question is from Paul, who asks, if innovation examples like the water recycling system or others are being designed or developed exclusively by ESA, or do you work with other partners such as private firms who are interested in bringing these technologies to a commercial market?
Yes, definitely. That relates back to the previous question. We have started to work with private partners in testing or bringing their technologies into space. There are a lot of companies who have interest in using the space station for their own benefit. And yeah, that branch of research or that branch of activities has just started. And we're opening up that path in the future for even more companies.
Good. Our next question is from Ilaria, who asks, how does the electromagnetic field of the brain change in during the hibernation or hypothermia that you discussed earlier?
Here, unfortunately, I do not have an answer to. You would need to talk to our experts. If you want, you can shoot me an email afterwards, and I'll try to find out and give you the answer after this session.
So, Ilaria, I'm sure we'll manage to get you an answer somehow. It's a very interesting question, though. We have a couple more questions. We've still got a couple of minutes left, so we've got a bit of time. This next one, so you mentioned how technology developed for space has become applied on Earth. This question asks, how does technology developed in the Arctic, for example, with Alaskan pipelines, has any of that become transferable to space research? I suppose this is generally technologies developed for extreme environments on Earth, and how readily are those applied in space?
Again, here, the water recycling system that we have developed for Concordia Station is a showcase example of how we bring research from Antarctic stations into space. The water recycling system on Concordia Station is actually part of the life support system on board the space station. That life support system is called Melissa. You may want to do some research into that system. And the water recycling system on Concordia Station is now an integral part of the Melissa system. So there are examples of how the research and how our activities from Concordia have fed into ISS.
So the research is more than just benefiting the astronauts themselves, as the technology, as technological advances from Antarctica also improving space activities.
That is correct, yes.
So the final question at the moment, I think, is what are the main differences between the ESA and the NASA Human Exploration Program? Does NASA focus on different things? And I would add to this, how much does ESA collaborate with NASA and other space agencies for its human research program?
Actually, our programs don't differ too much from each other. We actually work together a lot. There are a lot of platforms and groups where we exchange regularly. There are capabilities that we have at ESA that NASA does not have, and vice versa. One of the next big projects that we're going to work together with NASA is actually a 60-day Bedrest study at DLR. We will conduct a 60-day Bedrest study looking at artificial gravity as a countermeasure next year. We will conduct that study in Cologne, and that study will be performed jointly with NASA. They heard about our artificial gravity program. They got really excited. They do not have their own Bedrest facility anymore, so they do not have the capability to simulate weightlessness on the human body on Earth. But they have approached us and asked whether we are willing to cooperate with them, and we were more than happy to do so.
Great. So we have, I think, no more questions in the chat box, but I will use my privilege as convener to ask another question myself. And that was, you mentioned briefly the plan to expand the research at Concordia to other stations in Antarctica. And how is this, how will this benefit the research? Is this just to increase the sample size, or would the different conditions at different stations add to the research?
If we manage to expand our research program also to other polar stations, we may benefit from the various cultural differences that are on these stations. So right now we're working with Concordia station, which is a French-Italian station. So the crew members are from France and Italy, and they are very different from example from the British run stations. In addition, there are different pressure conditions. Concordia station is at 3,200 meters above sea level. That exposes the crew members to chronic hypobaric hypoxia, which of course is very different if you compare it to winter over crew members on coastal stations. And those pressure conditions, of course, may also have impact on the crew members. So if we were to run the same experiments in parallel on various different stations, we can compare those pressure conditions across those groups. And in addition, there are other factors that will enhance our program if we manage to expand our program to other stations.
It's an exciting prospect. So hopefully some things will happen there. There has been a couple of new questions that have just come in, or maybe I missed them. I apologize before. So one is how, seeing as ESA works a lot with NASA, have any cuts to funding affected ESA's work? I suppose that is a question that could apply to all space agencies. Government funding cuts, have they affected the human research program?
Luckily, so far not. All space agencies around the world work towards the same goal, and that is to enable human exploration out into space, out into deep space. And all space agencies and basically everybody is aware that before we do so, we need to do our homework. There is a lot of research that needs to be done. We need to be able to protect future crew members whom we send out into space from the dangers of the space environment. So the human research is and will continue to be an important pillar of all space agency activities. So far, there have been no cuts to our activities.
That's reassuring. And our final question from Marianne is about how are summer stations in Antarctica also interesting as platforms for future human space exploration, or are you more interested in the overwintering stations?
Actually, also summer stations on the Antarctic continent are very interesting for us. They can give us a lot of insight into how the crews interact with each other when they are confined when they're isolated and when they live far away from their normal environment. It gives us a lot of insight into how they deal with conflict, how group dynamics change over time. So also summer crews are very important for us. Summer crews on Antarctic research stations also undergo immunological changes, perception changes. So they are also a very valuable group for us to study.
Great. Yes, I think it's the diversity of stations is makes the research even more interesting.
Yeah.
With that, I think we've come to all of the end of all the questions. So I would just like to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded, so it will be uploaded as a video on the European Polar Board website. That's at europeanpolarboard.org. So you'll be able to recap on all of this information later on. And I would like to thank APECS, the Association of Polar Early Career Scientists, who have co-organized this webinar, and thank them for allowing us to use their webinar system. I'd like to thank all of the audience who joined and participated in this webinar, and particularly those who asked questions. Lots of fantastic questions for Jennifer there. But most of all, I'd like to thank Jennifer herself for giving up her time and sharing all this fascinating information with us. So thank you very much.
It was my pleasure, Joseph. Many thanks again for inviting me. And I would like to send a very special greeting to the Concordia crew, who I just see in the list of attendees is listening in. So hi from Europe to Concordia Station.
Fantastic. I didn't even realize that myself. We've got an Antarctic audience. So I've been Joseph Nolan from the European Polar Board, and thank you everybody for joining, and goodbye.
Bye everybody.